Hello, welcome to Carving Music. My name is Tom Jocks. I'm a violin maker and a musician. I play the cello and the viola da gamba. And today is the first of what I'm going to call Tuesday topics. Basically, I'm going to talk about something um, each Tuesday. So today, the topic is going to be historical cello. What does it mean? Uh, is it a Baroque cello, modern cello, something else? Um, what does it mean to be a Baroque cellist? Uh, what's the difference? What is the categorization? So here I have a cello. This is a cello that I made. I did make it to 19th century specifications, but I am a Baroque cellist. And so right now I have it set up for Baroque music. That is, I have a Baroque bridge on it, and I have gut strings. And that's basically as much as I'm going to do to it to make it a Baroque cello rather than a 19th century cello. You see, a 19th century cello still didn't have an end pin. So this does not have an end pin. It just has an end button, uh, like a violin would have. No end pin, so it doesn't have that spike that goes into the ground and holds it upright. Uh, that that came about in the 19th century, but it wasn't really popular until the 20th. And so even toward the end of the 19th century, there were a number of great musicians and soloists that did not use an end pin. There's Piatti, Popper, Houseman, um, you name it. So many of these 19th century cellists did not use an end pin. And if you ever look at a early 20th century cello method, you'll see that yes, they had end pins, but they were really short. And so basically it was just holding the cello for the player, but in the same plane as you would as if you didn't have an end pin. It wasn't until the middle of the century that you started having cellos come out further and further until some of the extreme flatness of certain players, uh, both from the past and the present. There, I've seen many like this. So basically, the posture of the cello has gradually risen toward the face. In the Baroque era, sometimes it was even placed on the ground like this, and you would have had to bend over or placed on a short stool. Uh, or when you're holding it, it could go down as low as somebody's ankles and still be perfectly playable for the Baroque bass lines. But as the music becomes more difficult, you see this cello start to rise. In the 19th century, there's a lot of very difficult cello music, and that is very playable without an end pin in the way that you're sitting. Um, yes, having an end pin and having it come out a little bit does help getting over the corner of the instrument, but for most music it is not necessary. When I'm practicing, I don't have a modern cello at the moment, but I do love some of the 20th century music, so I'm playing Shostakovich or whatever, and I will practice it on this. Of course, I'm not going to perform it on this, but I will practice just to keep those pieces in my fingers. And it works. You can tell that there is a difference when especially when you're trying to play anything past about 1915, 1920. But it works. You can play any kind of music on any kind of cello. It's just what kind of a sound are you getting? And that's the next part of this video, which is what is the definition of a Baroque sound versus a modern sound? And for that, I think we need to discuss strings and bows. So obviously, most Baroque players are going to be playing on gut strings. In this situation, I have gut A and D that are just plain gut, and then the G and the C are gut as well, but they are wound with silver to make them heavier. This winding is a technology that came about in about the 1660s, and before that, you would have had all the strings all the way down being just plain gut. But what that meant was The string either had to be very thick or had to be very long in order to get the very low notes. Especially, and so it was easier to get low notes that were playable quickly if you had a very long string, because that meant that there was less inertia for the bow to overcome. However, that makes for a very large instrument, and then the top strings are very tight. And then, so you make the very low strings very thick. Now they're hard to play, but you can make the cello shorter. In the 1660s, they did start winding these strings, and so you could increase the mass of the string, because the pitch of the string is related to the mass. How much mass is moving, the more mass, the slower it's going to vibrate. So for a string of a given length, they are, the more mass, it's going to vibrate slower, and you're going to have a lower pitch. So that's the technology part of the gut strings. Today we have steel strings and other metal type strings, synthetic core like nylon or other proprietary substances that are meant to mimic gut but are not gut. They're sometimes stronger than gut. They have a greater tensile strength. Sometimes they have more mass, so you can make them thinner. And all of them are going to be wound with some kind of metal. So that's the string part. For the bow part, now I have here several bows. This is my Baroque bow, and it has a clip-in frog. That is that the frog down here actually comes out if I wanted to have it come out. And then to have it stay, it just is there under the tension of the hair. And then I can increase that tension with a little bit of something stuck between the hair and the frog. In this case, I have some paper. This particular bow is a little bit on the short side. It is the wood that I had when I made this bow, and this was the very first bow I ever made. It works great. I was very careful for the thickness of the stick to get it to be able to play well. But this is a very typical Baroque bow. It has a very straight stick, a very narrow band of hair. And what that does, it does two things. The straight stick means that the hair bends around the string. Whereas in a modern bow, here, it is not a straight stick. It is a stick that actually bends inward like that. And what that does, when you apply tension to the hair actually stays straight. And so you're able to maintain a constant tension of the hair against the string from frog to tip. Whereas on a Baroque bow, that tension is variable. At the frog, it is there's not very much tension, and at the tip, there's quite a bit more tension, and it's variable in between. So you have from the frog to the tip, the bow changes. So depending on where you're playing the bow, you're going to get a different kind of articulation. So now that we have those two things, those are really the two major things. So anyone getting first started into historical cello or historical string instruments for that matter, those are the first two things you need to do. Gut strings and get a different kind of bow, a Baroque style bow. And the other thing that I would highly suggest for anyone getting involved in Baroque music is to get a Baroque bridge. The architecture of the bridge is going to be different, and that gives a totally different sound. On this cello, I've had everything from a very modern Belgian bridge. I've had the French style bridge. I made there's a Boccherini style Italian mid-18th century bridge, and at the moment I have here a bridge that is of my own design, but loosely based on the Stradivari bridges that we have documents for. And all of those bridges give a totally different sound to the instrument, even with the same strings, same string height, all those things. The different bridges themselves, because of their different architecture, they give different sound qualities. So So those are the three big things, or the two biggest, which are the bow and the strings, and the bridge is highly suggested. Although I do see a lot of people in Baroque orchestras nowadays play with modern bridges. I don't recommend it. For one thing, the optics, in my opinion, are not great. In terms of being historically informed, um, getting a Baroque bridge is a very minor thing to do to your instrument. It might cost some money, anywhere from $300 to maybe $800, depending on who you go to, but well worth it for a professional. Now, the other thing that makes a Baroque instrument different from a modern instrument is the neck. Now, the neck does not really affect the sound. Uh, it might affect it somewhat, but there have been no studies, and I can't tell you precisely what a different style neck would do to the actual sound of the instrument. However, I can tell you from a player's perspective, it changes your psychology when you're holding and playing the instrument. Um, I have here I have here a cello that I'm replacing the neck on, and so this is a cello that the owner wanted a Baroque style neck, and here I have a modern style neck. Now the biggest difference will be that on a modern neck, it comes out of the body. Here, I'll come a little bit closer. See, the modern neck comes out of the body of the instrument, whereas the Baroque style neck is flush to the top of the instrument. And then the fingerboard is placed on top of that, and the elevation that you would want above the body of the instrument will come from the angle that you place that fingerboard at, because the fingerboard itself is a wedge shape. And you can adjust that wedge shape to get different heights of the fingerboard over the body of the instrument. Um, so that in itself is a big difference. And the difference is because since the Baroque neck only comes up to the height of the top of the instrument, the space between this part here and where you place your fingers here is going to be greater than here. And it also means that down at this part of the neck is going to be thicker than on a modern instrument. And that whole difference gets much thicker than here. And that changes your psychology especially when playing in position, but also just for overall playing, the psychology changes. The first time I played a Baroque neck, as opposed to a modern neck, I played completely differently. Just naturally. Now that I've played many Baroque cellos, I know what to do on a modern style neck, which is what I have here. However, I still want a Baroque cello because I want to convert this back into its correct 19th century form so that I can play 19th century music in a more historically informed manner. Just make it easier because, of course, the Baroque setup does not really allow for the 19th century style playing. You can do it, and I do it. However, it would just be better with 19th century style setup. But a cello like this is very typical, as I said, for the modern Baroque player. Many players will get a cello, sometimes an old cello, sometimes just whatever cello they have, and they'll strap some gut strings on, get a Baroque bow, and that's it. That's what they do. That's the most cost-effective way of doing it, of at least getting into it. I think if you're a professional in this field, however, you should invest in a correctly set up Baroque instrument. However, I do recognize that a new cello can cost anywhere from $20,000 and up for a newly made cello, regardless whether it's Baroque or not. You can get some cheaper instruments. They are going to be cheaper instruments, so they're not going to be as good as a fully handmade master level instrument that you would buy from a full-time luthier. And then you have those players who have the great fortune to be playing on old instruments, sometimes some very great instruments, some of the great Italian instruments that are many hundreds of thousands of dollars if you're going to buy them. And in those cases, doing a full Baroque setup is maybe not the wisest thing if your intent is to resell it. Or if you're simply being lent an instrument, of course, you don't have any authority to do anything to it whatsoever. But so for those Italian or some of the great instruments that some of these people are playing, I understand why you wouldn't do a setup. However, if you have a 19th century German cello that you're going to use for Baroque playing because it's a little bit old, and you just stick some gut strings on it, well, yeah, you can use that. In my opinion, it's really just for 19th century playing. It'd be perfect for that. And then with the Baroque bow, of course, you're getting a lot closer. So that's just me ranting on about why everyone should have a Baroque cello and not a modern cello. That's all opinion. Take it for what it's worth. Of course, everyone's budget is going to be different. I certainly can't afford, if I was going to buy multiple instruments, I wouldn't be able to afford it. That's part of the reason why I became a violin maker, is because from this point of view, it costs a lot less. It costs you in time and effort. But if you don't have the money, that's one way to go. Yeah, just go off and learn violin making for years and practice your craft for years before you're able to make anything that's any good. Or you can spend $30,000-$40,000 or more on a new instrument. Or you can take an old instrument, cheap one, stick some gut strings on it. In terms of the sound production of a Baroque cello, the whole reason for having a Baroque bow is for articulation purposes. And it's not just one articulation that you're going for. So it's not just so that you can do. In fact, a Baroque bow doesn't really do that very well. It does that a lot better. And that's partly because of the way that I described how the hair works against the stick. But what a Baroque bow does do very well is change directions. And I don't mean back and forth. I mean changing. It's a little bit more like a race car. You can go around corners. Can have a very sharp articulation, followed by a very smooth one. And you can also change the tone quality of the note from harsh to like a flautando, something in between, and then the articulation from very chiffy to very, very smooth. You have something called a mezzo da voce, which is a and that's all done with the bow. And then if you add a little bit of vibrato to it, you get an effect like that. But you can do all those things with a modern bow as well. That's only one thing that a Baroque bow does very well and easily. If you know what you're doing, you can do the same on a modern cello. However, you need to have that conception of what it is that you want. So that musical conception goes both ways. You are informed by the instrument, and you also you should have an imagination and an idea for what you want to convey. And for that, we're going to get into other topics on Baroque music in the future. So another example of things that a Baroque bow does quite well is the 3-in-1. And part of that is because the bow itself is very light. The other aspect of it is that you can get actually a good sound with a very little bow, and then allow the bow to travel. So 3 notes, and then 1 note to take up the space on the bow that the 3 took, without hitting, and without doing. I really have to try to do that, whereas on a modern bow, it's almost the default. And again, that's part of what makes a Baroque sound. And it's a whole different sound world when you're talking about Baroque cello from modern cello. So there we have some of the basic differences between modern cello and a Baroque cello, and I did all that without having a modern cello at hand. I hope you found this useful. Please, next time you pick up a cello, you want to play some Bach or something, think about the differences that a Baroque cello has to a modern cello, and think about how that affects the music. I'll finish up by playing a little bit of Bach.